This video contains spoilers from the world and story of Subnautica. Please beware. Good evening everybody and welcome to another video. What would it look like if Ryley Robinson wasn't the only survivor of the Aurora crash in Subnautica? That is the question for today. And well, it's not really the first hypothetical question like this that I'm covering on the channel. Just for example, last time, we talked about what would happen if the Aurora ship ended up crashing just into the void right off the edge of the crater, and well, we concluded that if it was relatively close to the main game area, the difference probably wouldn't be too staggering. However, today's video I believe is going to be quite a bit different, because I believe if somebody else besides Ryley made it, there would actually be quite a few gameplay differences to be seen. Maybe not necessarily in the long term, but most definitely in the short term scenarios at least. So, without any further ado, let's just jump right into it and set the stage. Now, when the Aurora ended up crashing onto 4546b, its original crew was 157 members. In order to be able to explore this theory properly, we have to kind of at least get a guess onto who the possible survivors or survivor that Ryley would be able to be with could be, but to simplify everything, we're just going to say that one person besides Ryley would be able to make it. I mean, out of 157 people, that's not that big of a stretch. And honestly, I don't really think there would be a huge difference between 5, 7, or 8 people surviving, so let's just compare the differences between Ryley being by himself and between him being with one other person. Now, looking at the original crew of 157 members, the engineering team was by far the biggest part, with 85 members, so chances are whoever would survive would probably be from the engineering team. Though that might technically not necessarily correlate with the people that actually ended up making it onto the planet. Now, the Aurora was, by default, equipped with, most people assume, 50 Lifepods. However, during the initial impact, all the Lifepods on its starboard side unfortunately went bye-bye, so at the end only 25 ended up deploying. Now, we don't really know what exactly these went through during planetfall, but what we do know is that by the time they landed, only 10 can actually be found in the game, including the player's lifepod. So it was probably pretty rough. Now let's imagine one other survivor made it. Somebody from the engineering team is now on the planet. What would be the difference? Well, at the very beginning, probably not that big actually. I mean, the planet is entirely covered by water, and most of the movement you do is underwater, making it difficult to see others at a very long distance away. At the same time, Ryley's short-distance communications, or his radio basically, is busted at the start, meaning he can't really receive any emergency transmissions anyways. So until he, or technically the player, fixes that, their experience would probably be about the same as in the regular game. Now, once this radio gets fixed, yes, you would probably be able to receive some sort of an emergency transmission and, in this crazy theory, meet up with another survivor. Now, at this point, the gameplay would probably actually get quite a bit easier for him. I mean, not only can all work that is necessary to survive be divided between two people, but also there would probably be somebody with data that isn't corrupted on their PDA. Remember, the reason why Ryley has to scan everything is because his PDA actually ends up doing an oopsie upon landing and losing most of the data on the blueprints that it contains. So basically, in order to get them back, you have to scan items on the planet. Now, if we're talking about somebody whose PDA is not corrupted, all of the blueprints that you can build would probably be available to them from the start, and even then some. I mean, there is definitely a possibility that more things are available within the PDA blueprint database for a survivor that Ryley just never came across, and thus he had no chance to scan it, and thus he would never be able to build it. So in that regard, there might be a lot more that the PDA actually allows them to do compared to what we saw in the vanilla game. But here I think we arrive to what I suppose could be the biggest difference in how the entire game plays out, and that is the possibility of the long-distance comm relay on the Aurora being repaired. Now let's take this from the beginning. According to the Aurora black box, when the ship is first struck with the high energy beam, one of the main things that gives out besides the starboard lifepods is also the long-range transmitter, which is basically the main tool the Aurora uses to communicate with Altera, their headquarters. Now, I want to bring your attention to two particular survivors which end up emerging from Lifepods after the Aurora crashes, and those are CTO Yu and Second Officer Keen. Now, they actually end up surviving for quite a bit before supposedly and most likely succumbing to a Reaper Leviathan, but before they do, they actually hatch a plan. To quote from CTOU,
"We have to board the Aurora, repair the long-range comms, make contact with the other survivors. We can't be the only two that made it."
I think the important part here is that she mentions the possibility of repairing the long-range comms. Now, this might, in theory, give the Aurora the chance to talk directly to Altera again and organize their rescue, maybe even explain what's happening with the giant alien weapon that they discover later. Now, this would definitely be a huge difference, since, by default, everyone on planet 4546b is kind of cut off from the outside world in the game. Would this repair be possible? Well, maybe. You could argue that the relay section of the ship might have gotten blown up during the big explosion. However, I tend to think differently. Within the PDA entry regarding the Aurora ship status, the entire vessel is divided into two main sections, the engineering section and the habitation section. Now, it isn't necessarily indicated where on the ship these sections are. However, if you look into the engineering section, it contains the ion drive, the robotics suite, as well as some storage for the phase gate apparatus. Now, some of these sections we can actually even visit in the game, including, for example, the ion drive core, or the area where you can find all the prawn suits. So this is making me think that the engineering section is probably towards the back half of the ship, which is probably where you would have the long-range communications. They might even be in the bridge sections towards the top of the ship. If that is the case, then these communication relays probably weren't destroyed during the explosion, and thus there is at least a small possibility for them to be repaired. I mean, the CTO of this whole operation certainly seems to think so. To be honest, theorizing about what could happen if these actually got repaired is quite difficult. I mean, it's hard to say whether communicating with Altera would make a big difference in the short term, but in the long term, it would get them there faster. It might teach them about the precursor race, it might teach them about the existence of Kara, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well, so there are definitely theories to be made there too. So for now, we have a game that is a bit easier on the survival side because of work distribution, and with the possibility of even contacting Altera from on the planet. But before we wrap up, I actually want to touch up on two additional differences that I think would creep up during the game. The first one is quite simple. I think a lot of the creatures would actually be much easier to evade, since now if you want to either kill them or just stall them, you have to kind of juggle between using the stasis rifle and doing your other thing, whereas if you had at least two people, one could easily keep the creature on hold while the other looks for whatever they are there for. The more interesting one perhaps though that some of you might be asking is, what about the rocket? Would it only be possible for one person to leave? And my answer to that is, I don't think so. I mean, yes, the Neptune rocket in its description specifically says that it only has life support for one person. However, I don't think there's necessarily anything preventing survivors from building multiple rockets. Yes, it's very costly and not very time efficient, but theoretically, I believe there are enough ion cubes and everything in the map to support this. So even if all else fails, they might just be able to build multiple rockets and get out all the same. And hey, let's be honest, at the end of the day, if the survivor was anyone else but the chief of the non-essential systems maintenance, they might actually even have a better shot at building more efficient systems, cooler technology, and getting out of the planet faster without as much struggling. So honestly, having another survivor there to talk to Ryley might actually be a much bigger difference than, what it might seem on the surface. But anyways, that is just my theory, and I would love to hear what you guys think about that down in the comments. That brings us to the end of the video, however, so I really hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All of those would be very much appreciated. And hey, if there's anything I missed or other variations of the argument that you want to present, make sure to leave that down in the comments as well. I would very much like to read it. With that, I'm gonna wish you all a beautiful rest of the day, and I'll see you in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.